Hi there, I'm your host and animation student at Sheridan College, Terry Ibel, and welcome to the podcast. Our guest today is going to share his experience on how to go from basically being born to ending up with your own show and all the steps in between. And his name is Brett Jubinville, and he is the creator of Super Science Friends. And that's a show about a bunch of superpower wielding scientists like Albert Einstein and Mary Curie, who traveled through time to fight Nazis and the Pope and a whole bunch of other shenanigans. And Super Science Friends, if you haven't seen it, is currently airing on Cartoon Hangover in the US and YouTube internationally. And interestingly enough, even though he's an amazing animator, Brett never actually graduated from his animation program at St. Clair College. But he's a really experienced guy, and so I'm so happy that he's with us today. And, when he's not creating awesome shows, you can find him playing video games or axe throwing and a whole bunch of other things. So, Brett, thank you so much for being here today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing good. I'm a little tired, but otherwise pretty good.
Good. I mean, we could all use more sleep these days. So let's just kick this off. I thought I'd start by just asking you, what kind of stuff did you grow up watching that got you interested about getting into the animation industry in the first place?
Cool. Yeah. So I think I've thought a lot about like the cartoons that inspired me, and I'd have to say the big ones were the early '90s X-Men cartoon, which no surprise that we end up doing a superhero thing. And probably Batman after they redesigned him. So in the '90s there was Batman the animated series, and then they redesigned him. I think I can't remember his name, who did the redesigns, but they were much more sleek and stylized after the fact.
So how did you actually get into the industry yourself? So I know you went to college. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience of deciding to go to college and then, not graduating.
The not graduating was easy. That's the easiest part of the whole thing. Graduating is the hard part. Yeah. I decided to. Where should I start? Well, when I was in high school, my dad retired, and he had worked at a factory at Ford Automotive for 32 years. And I remember he was at the time he was teaching me to drive, and he said after retiring very nonchalantly, and I don't think he meant to be profound, but he said that it felt like he had just lived the same day over and over again for the last 32 years. Which, if you think about it, if you're working a factory job, that's pretty much what you do. Is you get up, you go to work, you do the same thing. Then you come home, you eat dinner, you go to bed, and then rinse and repeat for 3 decades. And even though he wasn't trying to be profound, it kind of had a profound impact on me. And I realized that at that moment I was kind of drowning in a lot of classes that I was not prepared for, a lot of sciences and maths and just things that was a little too much. And I decided then, I was like, okay, enough of that. I'm going to just do art classes and classes that I want to go to, and like debate classes and creative writing and these things that kind of made me happy. And I'm going to leave the other stuff by the wayside. And so that's how I treated the rest of high school. And then when I left high school, I still had that same mentality of, I just don't want to do that thing that's reliving the same day thing. So I wanted to do something artistic. Obviously, I wanted to be something that was a bit of a craft. So fine art was not that fine art isn't a craft, but it's more artistic as opposed to craftsmanship. So I wanted to do something that was an actual, like, a job. And there aren't many other alternatives other than animation, actually. There's illustration, but even then that was kind of waning a little bit as a viable career. And so animation was it, as by default.
Yeah, and then so you got into school, and then what happened? That while you were there, you decided you didn't think graduating was going to be what you wanted to do.
Well, it wasn't so much that. It was just a matter of circumstance. So by the time I was in my third year, it was a 3-year program. I was already working. I was working at a couple web design places, and I was chauffeuring to pay for school. And so there was a lot going on. I was pretty much getting home at like 5, 6 in the morning from my chauffeur job, and then working throughout the day at the web design places, and then trying to get to school. So at a certain point, just something had to give. And I felt like, well, I'm already working, so maybe I don't have to go to these classes. So I didn't drop out. I just flunked. because I stopped going to certain classes that I just didn't want to go to anymore. Same thing with high school, actually. Now that I say it out loud, I'm repeating the same pattern over and over and
Oh
over.
no, for 30 years.
So,
Eventually you'll say the same thing. Too bad. Yeah, actually, so you mentioned when we were chatting leading up to this talk, you were working for some web design firms and then you went on to pitch a show in the States. And it was actually pretty surprising how, everything went wrong and then ended up kind of right. I'm wondering if you could just go through that experience.
sure. Yeah. So the way I got to the U.S. Was that I had when I came out of school, I had put all my artwork onto this website, which was an illustrator's kind of website. In the end, I did coming out of animation, I was leaning more towards illustration, and so I put it up on this website trying to get some attention, and I got an email out of the blue from a woman who worked at the Jim Henson Company, and she said, "Hey, I saw your stuff, really liked it. If you're ever in LA, you come on by and pitch an idea," which I took as like a genuine, uh, honest to goodness, like invitation, like you should come to LA right now.
Like book your flight tomorrow.
Book your flight. So I had no money, so I couldn't book my flight tomorrow, but I did kind of have a few odd jobs here and there, like CD covers for local bands and stuff like that, that I could scrape together some money for. And so I did those jobs really quick, and then I briefly moved to Toronto, where I slept on my brother's couch for a few weeks while I did like another job in Toronto, and then flew out to Vancouver, where I stayed with my sister for like a month, and eventually I made my way to Los Angeles. And I showed up at the Jim Henson Company, and I kind of knocked on the door, and I said, "I'm here." And she knew who I was. I had emailed her just as I arrived, and she basically told me like, "Oh, well, it's great that you're here, but we're going out of town, and we'll see you when we get back. We'll be back in 2 weeks."
Oh my gosh.
And again, like money was tight, so I did not have 2 weeks worth of hotel money just kind of rattling around in my pocket. So I went back to the airport because I did have my return flight. So one smart thing I did do. So I went back to the airport, and that's where I would sleep for most of the time. And then I would transit back into the city, and then when I wanted to go downtown. But the one thing that was great about it was, even though she left me and she said, "Okay, we'll be back in 2 weeks," is she very quickly jotted down on this piece of paper names and phone numbers. There was about 10 or 12 phone numbers, and she just said, "Here, call these people. Tell them I sent you." And so I called them, and they were all like executives of Warner Brothers or Nickelodeon or Cartoon Network or just all these different places, Disney Channel. And because she was so nice, and because I think she was, had a really good reputation, I would call these people and I'd be like, "So-and-so's told me to just give you a call." And they said, "Oh yeah, sure. Come on down. Come on over." And not a single person turned me away. Not one. Which I think speaks to her more than it does to me. And yeah, so I got to spend the nights sleeping in the hotel, or sorry, the nights sleeping in the airport, and the days touring these great production facilities and just getting shown around and seeing what is actually a studio looks like. Because we didn't have an internship program at our school, so this was my first foray into like seeing an actual animation studio.
I can't imagine sleeping in an airport overnight every night. It doesn't sound like something I would enjoy doing at all.
They don't turn the lights off. It's kind of like a hospital that way. And but the good thing was, at the time, if a security guy came by, you could just go like, "I'm waiting for my flight," because I did have my ticket, and they'd leave you alone. But I don't think you could get away with that today. I think they've wise to it.
Yeah, okay. So I did want to talk a little bit more about Super Science Friends. I'm wondering, maybe you can kind of give like an overview of how you view the show, and then how did that go from being, an idea in your head to actually becoming a fully produced show with a team behind it?
Yeah. When you say like my view on the show, do you mean like what?
Yeah, there's like the Wikipedia version, like a bunch of historical figure scientists with superpowers traveling through time, headed up by Winston Churchill, but how do you picture it in your head? Like, what's the driving force, main idea behind it?
I mean, it's the way I came up with it was I was playing Fallout New Vegas, and there was a character that looked a lot like the Space Ghoul. I mean, if you put them side by side, arguably I ripped off Fallout New Vegas for this character, but that's how I came up with it. Was I drew that character. Whenever I come up with a show idea, typically it'll come from a sketch. So I'll just be sketching random stuff, and then I'll start thinking as I'm drawing, like, oh, interesting. Wonder what kind of world that person lives in. And so I did that same thing with this one, where I came up with that design, and then I really liked it, and I just kind of couldn't sleep that night, and I stayed up figuring out the world that it could inhabit for this character to actually exist. For me, like what the show means to me right now is one, it's the first show that I actually have written. Like the show to me is the experience of me learning how to make a show. So if you go back and you look at episode 1 versus say episode 5, and certainly episode 6, which hopefully will be out soon, there is an obvious visual learning curve that you can see, not only in the visual style and the way that we frame our shots and the way that we draw the characters, but also just in the way that we tell the story. Like in the first one, we were with the Super Science Friends the whole time. There was very little cutaway to someone else. Whereas now we have this A and B plot where we show the bad guys and we kind of show what they're doing, and then we cut back and forth. And that to me is just like us getting better at writing and getting better at making the show.
So how did it go from, you staying up late at night drawing this character to actually having a team behind it and producing the first episode? Like, you obviously had to sell people on this and then find resources and all that other stuff. So maybe you can just go through that a little bit.
Sure. At the time I had started Tin Man already with my partner Morgan. So that night that I had come up with the idea, she was at a conference called Kid Screen, which used to be held in New York. And she was there to pitch some kids shows that we had come up with to like Nickelodeon Cartoon Network. And so because I was up all night and I was feverish about this new idea that I just birthed into the world, I sent her the one sheet that I had cobbled together, and I said, throw that other crap in the garbage. This is the show. Oh, no. And so like this is as she's heading into a pitch with the Cartoon Network. And so she goes, okay, and then quickly like reads the thing and doesn't really understand what the hell she's reading because it was, all cobbled together. And then she pitches it, and without surprise, it goes completely horribly, and they don't really care for it, and they said it's too soon for Nazis and a bunch of other things. So it didn't go well. The other shows that we went in there with, they had a chance, but we completely just kiboshed that. So after that dismal affair, it kind of just sat on the shelf for a while, and it sat in our dev folder collecting dust with all our other kind of half-baked ideas. And a couple years later, Kickstarter started to become a thing. And it was intriguing because we were a small studio, and this kind of crowdsourced, alternative revenue stream thing. We were like, oh, we should try that out. And we looked through all the properties all the show ideas that we'd come up with of something that we could try and kickstart. And this one just kind of jumped out as something that would probably be able to find some fans. It's very kind of science-based, and that was, starting to pick up and get popular with guys like Neil deGrasse Tyson, being interviewed on The Daily Show and things like that. So we figured that might be worth a shot, and so we did a Kickstarter, and thankfully it was successful. And that's how we started doing it. And then after that, the Kickstarter, I should clarify, is a terrible way to raise money. We raised, $30,000, but because we way overpromised on all the rewards, and because shipping, we had no idea what shipping costs, and it costs a lot. All of the money went towards that. So we were very out of pocket for the episode, but the way we paid for it then is the same way we pay for it now, more or less, which is we do work for clients, and then we take the revenue from that, and we work on something that we want to work on. We have Patreon and some other things now that help, but for the most part, it's still just like do some legit work and then take the money from that and do some fun stuff.
So like the last I checked on your YouTube channel, at least you have almost 5 million views, over 100,000 subscribers to the show, and it's growing. Do you see revenue streams coming in specifically for this show other than Patreon, or is it you're going to continue to? This is like your creative project on the side of your studio work?
There's a little bit. It's the YouTube ad revenue isn't much. Like, it's probably the most we've ever made is maybe a few $100s a month. And that's probably been in a month where we released an episode, which cost, several tens of thousands of dollars to produce. So there isn't so much of a future on YouTube just from the YouTube ad revenue. Not that it doesn't help. Certainly every little bit helps. Patreon I could see as a real force to pay for it. I've seen some very successful Patreons. I'm very bad at promoting the stuff and pushing that because I don't want to ram it down people's throats. But I have seen other YouTube channels and other kind of creators where they're very good about it, but they do mention it a lot of just like, hey, and if you like what I do, then support us on Patreon. Right. And I feel like if I were to kind of ramp it up that way, then there might be something there. But for now, it is this thing that we're doing that we know is good. Like, we know people like it, and we know that it's got something. So it will find a home, I think, beyond just being on YouTube. It's just a matter of when and who and how.
Yeah. So it sounds like kind of you discovered that there was an audience for this rather than like doing it the opposite way, like thinking what an audience would want and then creating something for them. Yeah. Going forward, as your audience grows, like, what do you think are the main reasons you get new viewers and people latch onto the show? Is it the idea itself? Is it the characters? Is it the humor? Is it the style? Like, when you finish an episode, you're like, oh, people are going to love this because.
That's a really good question. I've been wrong about the audience since the very beginning. Like, I figured. If I thought anything, I thought like, okay, we're going to make this. It's going to tap into this kind of like, nerdy pop culture that seems to be getting big in like English speaking countries like the US, Canada, UK, etc. And it ended up being Germany was really big on the Kickstarter. That was like our number one supporter was Germany. And then after that, our biggest fans came from Russia and Latin America. And there was nothing in English speaking.
Yeah, none of those countries speak English.
We're like, what the hell? And now we've tapped into the US market a little bit. Like, I can look through the stuff on the analytics on YouTube, and I can see that the US is now like slightly our number one viewership. But I would argue that the mega fans, the people that do cosplay, that do fan art, that attend the live streams, that just like want to be part of the kind of community, are people out of Russia mainly. And it's not the first time I've heard that. There is something about that area of the world where maybe it's been underserved for a long time or something, but they get really passionate about anything that they are watching or that they get into.
Well, when you figure that out and capitalize on it, who knows where it'll go. So my next question is kind of around, so you're working at a creative agency with a whole bunch of creative professionals, and everyone has their own ideas of what like they'd like to produce creatively, and of course you have like client work. How do you continually align a team around kind of idea that you spearheaded, that was kind of your thing, and somebody might want to work on their own creative work rather than a different idea? Like, how do you get everybody's sense of humor and style and etc. all in one show so that everybody can feel like it's part of theirs and like make it the best they can be?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something where, well, the first thing is that everything we work on is kind of for the company. So it's not like a collective where people are bringing different aspects of it. It's very much a traditional studio where it's like we hired animators and now they animate the things we want them to animate. So I don't know if there's a ton of opportunity for someone who's here to work on their own show. Long story short, it's kind of, they'll work on whatever I tell them to work on, but
right. But I guess there's a difference between like, this is my job and also like, I'm excited to work on this fun idea, right?
Yeah, totally. There is something about working on a show that you think is cool. I remember I worked on a show called Ugly Americans a few years ago, or more than a few years ago now, but back in 2011. And there was something about knowing like that your friends were going to watch this because it was on after South Park or whatever. So I think that's a big driver, is that the people that work on it actually do like the show and they like the comedy of it. A lot of the creative of the show is still it's still the same small group of people that worked on episode 1. So it's myself, um, a guy named Kevin Williams who works with us, who has written several episodes, and he's really like the science force behind the show. Like he looks into, as I said, like I almost flunked those science classes in high school, but he kind of lives and breathes that stuff. So he does a lot of the research, and then Laurel Dalgleish has done all our boards for the main episodes since the very first one, and that brings a certain charm and a certain humor to it as well. It's just she draws real funny, so that helps, and it's part of the reason why we've taken so long to do the episodes we've done, is because it's still very reliant on this core group. I should mention Larissa Melnick as well. She's been our lead animator since about episode 2, and she's really taken it beyond what I could do and fleshed out all the character libraries and all the hand poses and stuff that I didn't bother doing. I was just like, yeah, here's what a hand looks like. And now she can tell you what it looks like from every angle, and has been great with the rest of the crew for that.
So maybe talking a little bit more about the team. I know you're fairly small. Tin Man Studio is fairly small compared to like the bigger studios. So when it comes to, building a team, what kind of animators or designers or storyboard artists are you looking for? Are you looking for people that are very specialized, or are you looking for people that have a very general experience and can work on different areas as needed?
Generalists, almost exclusively. And that comes from us being very small at the early days, where it was just Morgan and myself. And so we needed someone, if we were going to bring someone in, let's say we had a commercial that was 8 weeks. There might be 4 days of design work in that 8 weeks. So for us to hire just a designer to come in for 4 days, and then we have to find an animator or a storyboard artist to board those designs, and then an animator to animate that storyboard artist design. It just seemed like too much work. So we would look for someone who could do all three. And then we kept that mentality going as we grew. And so, well, now we're big enough where there are some people that just gravitate more to design or gravitate more to boards. Typically, everyone is still kind of hands on deck for whatever we need done. So I think almost everyone here can animate. So if we need to crank out a bunch of animation for something, then we do that. And if the animation work is kind of done and we just need to focus on boards, then we do that.
So when you're looking for somebody new to join your team, is that kind of one of the top qualities you look for? Or is there something else that helps somebody stand out from the rest of the crowd?
It's really being able to draw, being good in various aspects. Being a good mimic is important. It's great if you have your own style, and it's great if you have your own work. But the art of animation is being able to drop into a studio, be handed kind of the style guide, and then adapt to that. So that's important. One of the main things I would say that's really important for us is just being able to fit in with the kind of vibe that we've got here, which is it's a very relaxed environment. Everybody works very hard, but it's still very much like they come in, they're quiet, nobody really bothers anyone, they put on their headphones, they get to work. And so when I'm interviewing someone, even if they're the greatest artist I've ever met in my entire life, if they come in and I'm talking to them and I feel like they're going to kind of wreck that vibe, then we don't work with them.
So be quiet, don't bother anybody.
Well, it's just like it's this thing of like, I remember when Google announced like their big open office space that they did, that they kind of pioneered, and then everyone followed suit. And I remember looking at that and going like, my God, like people bother other people. That is just the fact of life. And when you put enough people in a room, if you're putting 500 people in a giant room, it's just going to be like this simmering environment of irritation all the time. And so at our studio, we have a lot of like little rooms. So typically there's no more than like 5 or 6 people in a room, maybe 7 or 8 at the most. And that's purposefully done just so it's like, because if, personalities can clash, and we just try and keep the drama low if we can.
Makes sense. So last thing I want to talk about is, because I know you have some experience in this, is how to craft, a pitch, and how that is changing, especially with, Netflix approving a huge amount of animated content. Can you go into that and how it's changing and what your experience is with that?
Sure. I've only ever gotten one pitch, aside from commercials, which I've pitched. I've only ever gotten one pitch that actually went through, and that was a pitch for a show called Ramblers that got picked up by Nickelodeon for their shorts program. So we did get to make a pilot with Nickelodeon for that, which was great. But I've never gotten a show onto Fox or something like that. So you may want to ask Seth MacFarlane. However, all you got is me right now. So from what I understand, the way it used to be is each channel, each network would have an audience, and they would cater to that audience. So, if you go to the sci-fi, they would cater to sci-fi fans. And if you went to comedy, it would be comedy fans. The way it's changing now with Amazon and Netflix, and the only reason I know this is I've attended some talks where people from Netflix have come and spoken, is that you don't go to them and ask what they're looking for, which is usually what was the first thing. If you went to say CBC to pitch a kids show, you'd say, yeah, what are you looking for? And they'd say, well, we're looking for boys 8 to 12 adventure show where it's got comedy and it's got blah, 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 this and that. And that is kind of disappearing. And so what Netflix wants is they just say, we want everything. So they're greenlighting 300 things a year. So there is no audience for them. Everybody's the audience for Netflix. And so what they want you to do is they want you to show up with a script at the least already worked out. They want to see your vision for the show because they have no interest in buying your show and then producing it for you. They want to just cut a check and have you produce the show. Whereas if you were to say back in the day, pitch a show to Nelvana, what they would most likely do is they would pay you for the show, say thank you very much, and send you on your way. Because having you involved is kind of, just like I talked about earlier, it kind of creates drama. It's why have the creator involved when they're going to have their own ideas and their own way of wanting to do things when you can just, take the show and very cleanly produce it on your own without someone who's overly emotionally attached.
Makes sense.
Netflix does the opposite, where they want the creator involved. They want the guy who's written that script in the room, because those are the people that have the passion and come with the ideas, and they want to. If they believe in the person, and and that they feel their passion for that project is genuine, then I think they're willing to take a risk and give some money towards it.
So if you want to pitch to Netflix, you have to be somebody who not only wrote the script, but also knows how to produce it. You have to know animators and production people and storyboard artists, or do they say, here's a bunch of resources, go to a studio that's going to produce this show for you? Or do they just say, here's a bunch of resources, figure it out on your own?
I've never been in the room with them, so I can't genuinely answer that. But I would imagine that if they like you enough and they like your idea enough, they will recommend, teaming up with somebody. But knowing that stuff does not hurt. If you're able to take it and run with it, then I think that's a benefit to everyone.
Sure. So maybe just talking about pitching, and I'm a student, and people listening to this podcast, maybe beginners or students themselves, what advice can you give somebody who's more or less anxious to pitch or doesn't know where to start to conceptualize their idea? I mean, for you, Super Science Friends, you stayed up all night and you were already going to a pitch the next day anyway, so you kind of knew what to prepare. What kind of advice can you give somebody who would like to pitch but doesn't really know where to start? That's a whole other topic, I guess.
I think it's something that there's so many ways to skin a cat in this regard. The story I heard was that take Adventure Time, for example, that was pitched as part of the shorts program at Nickelodeon. So they put a call out for ideas, and then people submitted ideas. Probably, nowadays they would submit it over the web with drawings and, kind of a one sheet. So it's what your idea is, some episode synopsis, some character designs. And then they passed on it. And then it went over to Penn Ward, found Fred Siebert from Frederator, pitched it to him. He passed on it. And luckily some of his guys talked some sense into him. And then he said, okay, well, let's do it. And then they did it, and they were able to sell it to Cartoon Network. So that's one where they actually produced a short at one studio, and then it took it to another one. from what I've heard from about the SpongeBob pitch, he walked in with like a 200-page book, and he was like, "Here's the show. Here's all the rotations. Here's all the characters. Here's all the scripts. Here's all the here's everything." And then there are other places that don't want that at all. Like they just want to come in, they want to hear the log line, they want to hear that nugget, that hook, and then start to flesh it out and take a little bit of ownership on it themselves. The one thing I can say, like having pitched a few times, is that the more involved the person you're pitching to is, the better it goes. So if you can get them excited and they start, putting in their own ideas, oh, and then maybe this guy does this, and then it turns out that he's his brother, then you're good. And so what you want to do is, if that rally starts to happen, you don't want to shut it down. You don't want to say like, no, he's not his brother, he's the cousin. You just kind of, those are details that can get worked out later. So you just kind of want to be there. You want to present yourself as someone who this person wouldn't mind working with for the next 2 or 3 years.
Gotcha. So it sounds like step one is research where you're going to pitch to figure out what they want to see. And then if you get in front of them, kind of go with the flow, kind of get them involved, ramp up the excitement, and show that you're an open, flexible person who's fun to work with.
Yeah, you don't want to just take whatever suggestion they have and then say like, oh yeah, we can totally do that. Oh, you want to make him a girl? Okay, yeah, we'll do that. Because they do want you to be the force of it, but you don't want to shut them down either. And I would argue that doing the research is very important, not only for pitching a show, but for applying for a job. So if you're going to apply to, let's say, Nelvana for a preschool show like Babar season 18, then don't put a demo reel together that only shows your adult blood and guts animation. And it's not hard to like put together some specific stuff. So you can have your general demo reel and your general portfolio, but throw in a few special ones. So if you're going to go to Cartoon Network, then draw some Cartoon Network looking stuff. Because more often than not, if you're applying for like a design position on an existing show, they don't care that, yeah, you can learn it or there's talent here and we just need to nurture it out of them. What they want to see is they want to open that portfolio and see their show and go like, yep, this guy's got it. Hire him or her.
That makes sense.
So and like I said, maybe you'd spend a couple days putting together something specific for them, and I think that 2-day investment can go a really long way.
Yeah. So just wrapping up, any final thoughts for students like myself, or those who are just studying in general, who are just beginning their careers in the animation industry, coming from a seasoned professional as yourself?
Yeah, I've got 2 pieces of advice that I always give to students. One is if you haven't yet, get a credit card. Especially if you're planning to freelance, because believe it or not, banks are not anxious to give credit cards to unemployed recent grads, but they're very anxious to give credit cards to current students. And having a credit rating can mean like I didn't have it when I came out of school, and I couldn't even get an apartment. It's like things like that are really tricky, especially if you want to freelance. My second piece of advice is be as kind and nice to your fellow classmates as you can, because as good as your resume is and as good as your portfolio is, it's usually a recommend from one of them that will get you your first jobs in the industry. At least for us, when we're looking for someone new, the first person I go to talk to is the animators that I'm already working with. And I say, hey guys, we're looking for this type of person. Do you know anyone? And then they'll recommend if they know someone who's just freed up from a gig somewhere or something. That's where I get my recommends from. We really don't do like job postings all that often. So it's
makes sense. So get a credit card and be nice. I love it. Great. Well, thank you so much, Brett. It's been a real privilege to have you on this podcast today.
Thanks. The pleasure's all mine.
Great. And just before we leave, I want to share some ways you can follow Brett's work on Super Science Friends. He's got supersciencefriends.com, which is the website dedicated to everything about the show. They even have a fun little beat 'em up side scroller game, some songs and other tidbits. You can find them on YouTube at youtube.com/supersciencefriends and join their 100,000 subscribers. They have Instagram, so instagram.com/supersciencefriends, where you can see behind the scenes and some fan art. And then Brett mentioned the Patreon, and just go to www.patreon.com/supersciencefriends and you can find them there to support them there. So, all right, thanks for tuning in, everyone. And a really big thank you again to you, Brett Jubinville. And be sure to check out our next episode. Okay, bye.